This video will go over cards that on the surface seem bad, but actually have some really good uses with other cards and combos. At number 10 we've got Fire Sorcerer. This card has the flip effect of randomly sending 2 cards from your hand to the graveyard in order to inflict 800 points of damage. If its effect was simply to inflict 800 burn damage without a cost, it would still be bad. The fact that it requires 2 discards, random discards at that, which is the worst kind of discard there is, and is actually super rare as a cost, just makes it mega garbage tier. That is, of course, until Reverse Reuse was printed. You see, Reverse Reuse allows you to pick 2 flip monsters from your graveyard, and then special summon them to your opponent's side of the field, face down. So with 2 sorcerers in the graveyard, with 1 card, you can make your opponent discard 4 random cards from their hand, since Fire Sorcerer's flip effect is mandatory, which is basically a full hand wipe. 1 card combos are usually the ones that see viable play, especially since Reverse Reuse can be used with another card on this list I'll talk about a few places down, and only requires you to set up your graveyard and not your hand or field. Getting a card in your hand or to the field is hard. Getting cards into the graveyard is easy. That being said, this is not a top tier combo or even a rogue deck strategy, and only an above average gimmick deck. You can, however, use cards like Creature Swap and Switcheroo to make use of this card too, so you're not entirely reliant on Reverse Reuse. But it is kind of bottom of the barrel in usefulness, and that's why it's only at number 10. Number 9, Side Effects. This card has the effect of, your opponent gets to choose 1 to 3 cards to draw, and then you gain 2,000 life points for each card they draw. Allowing your opponent to draw 3 cards for 6,000 life points is not a very good trade-off, especially since you go -4 in that play. Most people would agree going -4 is generally a pretty bad effect, especially if it's for one of the least valued kind of effects in the game of gaining life points. Now, here's what makes this card useful. For one, what if you're trying to meal your opponent, and specifically by overdrawing? If you use cards like Present Card first, then side effects for 3 more cards, and then Trickstar Reincarnation, assuming your opponent had 0 cards in their hand at the start of that combo, that's a 16 card mill. That's nearly half the deck, and that's under the assumption of the least amount of cards in the hand possible. Of course, it's fair to argue that they still have 8 cards in hand after all of that, which is kind of why mill decks like these don't see much play. But unlike other conventional mill cards, Side Effects life point gains can be used to further its plays. Having more life points combos with cards like Backup Squad and Temple of the Mind's Eye to draw cards off of battle damage, which can allow you to stall further by drawing into cards like Swift Scarecrow or Battle Fader. And with cards like Dried Winds to destroy problem cards on your opponent's side of the field when you gain life points, as Dried Winds allows you to pop 1 card once per turn when you gain life points, and works during your opponent's turn. But still, mill decks in general don't do so well, and making this card useful requires a lot of board setup. But if you are set up, its effects are both incredibly useful for its specific kind of life point gain mill deck. Number 8, HIRO'S Shadow Scout. This card has the flip effect of making your opponent draw 3 cards, and then they discard all spell cards they drew, but get to keep the rest. So at best, it's a mill 3 cards if they draw nothing but spells. At worst, it lets your opponent draw 3 cards with you having to set it up and no other benefits. And that's why this card is semi-limited in Duel Links for being too good. Now let me explain. That all does sound bad for regular Yu-Gi-Oh! Because it is. A 3-card mill is nothing. But in Duel Links, where decks only have 20 cards, it's still only a little bit better. But also in Duel Links, it is a lot easier to stall out your opponent with the lack of extra deck monster spot removal. So slowly milling your opponent while stalling out is a legitimate meta deck. And since the fact that Warm Worm is the second best mill card in that game, it just goes to show that there aren't really any other better options. So with HIRO'S Shadow Scout, If your opponent attacks into it with less than 3 cards in their deck, they lose the duel automatically, since it's a mandatory effect. Whereas attacking into Warm Worm would just leave them with no cards in the deck, but still allow them to play out the rest of the turn to try and win. And since flip effects are easier to get off, HIRO'S Shadow Scout is slightly better. And that's why they went in and limited a bunch of the stall cards, as well as put HIRO'S Shadow Scout on the semi-limited list. But in regular Yu-Gi-Oh!, it is a useful card to use with reverse reuse, alongside Fire Sorcerer, to allow you to draw 3 cards if you give it to your opponent. So, even in real Yu-Gi-Oh!, it does have some niche uses. Number 7. The Bistro Butcher. This card has the effect of, each time it inflicts battle damage to your opponent, they draw 2 cards. With 1800 attack, this is supposed to be a high attack monster with a negative effect. Back in the days where La Jin was meta because of its high attack of 1800 as well. But even in its time, it wasn't really played because its negative effect was too bad, and cards like La Jin and Mechanical Chaser existed. But Butcher is useful in one niche EXODIA deck. If you give your opponent Butcher with cards like Creature Swap, and then just attack into it with a whole bunch of floaters, you'll continuously draw 2 cards while refueling your field with monsters to attack into it, and let you basically draw your whole deck in one turn. And with the massive amounts of floaters, and just using reload a few times when your hand is big, you can basically win the game if you pull off this relatively simple combo. Number 6. Inspection. This card has the effect of, during your opponent's standby phase, you can pay 500 life points to look at 1 random card in their hand. Generally, cards like this are not very useful, since they don't do anything outside of giving you information on your opponent's hand, which can be done by better cards that also let you do something else, like Spiritual Water Art Aoi. Now, what was useful about this card was its ability to pay 500 life points as many times during your opponent's standby phase as you wanted, as Inspection doesn't state that it's once per turn. So, if you're running a Reversal Quiz OTK, you could use Inspection to get your life points down to around 500, then use Reversal Quiz with a set Fuma Shuriken or Black Pendant to swap life points with your opponent and then burn them with the destruction damage of either of those 2 equips. And Inspection was the fastest and easiest 1-card way of getting to 500 life points or below. And it was so good that Konami made a ruling change, and Inspection can only be used once per turn now. So it's once again kind of a useless card, but at least it was pretty darn useful at one point in its past. Number 5. Self-Destruct Button. This card has the effect of, if your life points difference is at least 7,000 points lower than your opponent's, then you can make both players' life points 0, which just straight up forces a draw. Now, what this card is useful for is trolling your opponent. It's so much easier to get your opponent to high amounts of life points with cards like Gift Card, rather than trying to reduce them, and then just running nothing but stall cards. You don't actually try to win and just force draws, but your opponent won't be winning either, and that's why this card is banned. Not for being too good, but for being the ultimate troll card. Speaking of Gift Card though, number 4, Gift Card. This card has the effect of just increasing your opponent's life points by 3,000. On the surface, and by itself, it's nothing but harmful to you to go -1 to give your opponent a decent chunk of life points, and is only really useful in trolly decks, like the Self-Destruct Button deck, or it's an incredibly useful card in Nurse Burn decks. There are 2 cards called Dark Lord Nurse and Bad Reaction to Samachi, who both have the effects that all life point gains are turned into the exact same amount of burn damage instead. So with one of those 2 cards out, Gift Card turns into a 3,000 life points of burn damage card. And having 3 gift cards means an OTK with 9,000 points of burn damage. Nurse Burn decks can easily burn your opponent for 8,000 to dead in 1 turn, and Gift Card is a key component in all of them. Number 3. Present Card. This card has the effect of discarding your opponent's entire hand, and then allows them to draw 5 cards. Its out-of-the-box usefulness is, if your opponent has more than 5 cards in the hand, it will make them get rid of them all so that they only have 5. Although, most decks hover around 5 or less cards in their hand at all times. Also, most decks nowadays don't really mind having their cards in the graveyard, so its discard effect is debatable on its usefulness. So it doesn't really have any standalone practical uses. Unless, of course, the whole strategy of your deck is to give your opponent cards. If running a mill deck, you can combo this card with Trickstar Reincarnation, in order to make sure your opponent has a big hand to lose. A combo which was used in just normal Trickstar decks that had no intention of milling and just wanted to make use of Trickstar Lycoris's damage. A card which does a little bit of burn damage for each card drawn, which can be comboed with other copies of itself, its field spell card, or Dark Room of Nightmare to deal some major burn damage. There's also shenanigans you can pull with cards like Drone Lockbird or Protector of the Sanctuary, which makes it so your opponent just straight up loses their entire hand, which is also an incredibly powerful effect to pull off. Number 2, Broken Bamboo Sword. This card has an effect that basically does nothing, like Toon World. When it's equipped to a monster, they gain 0 attack. Although, similar to Toon World, its lack of an effect is basically because it's just meant to be on the field to activate other cards, as there's a series of Bamboo Sword support cards that require Broken Bamboo Sword to be out on the field, and some of them are really, really good, like Golden Bamboo Sword and Curse Bamboo Sword. With the Bamboo Engine, you can activate a whole bunch of spell cards in one turn while drawing and searching out cards, which helps EXODIA decks using Royal Magical Library to draw a whole bunch of cards. It's also used in a lot of other draw a bunch of card strategies. Was also used in an FTK in Duel Links with Woodland Sprite, which caused Golden Bamboo Sword to be limited in that game, as well as seeing lots of use today with Isolde plays in order to send them to the graveyard to special summon Hero Kid from the deck for Link plays. It's probably one of the most useful and most played equip cards in the game, yet the card itself literally does nothing. And number 1, Neo-Spacian Aqua Dolphin. Aqua Dolphin has the effect of, you can discard one card, then look at your opponent's hand and destroy one monster if you control a monster with a higher attack, and then inflict 500 damage to your opponent. Or if you can't find one, you take 500 damage instead, and destroy no cards in your opponent's hand. With its card's incredibly low attack of 600, it was very rare for you to actually pull the effect off on its own without another monster with a higher attack on the field. In short, it was basically useless as its cost was too balanced for its effect, and was even just considered straight up bad. And it was sort of a meme in the Yu-Gi-Oh community that the Neo-Spacians were all garbage cards, except Grandmal. But then a few things happened in Yu-Gi-Oh that made it so some decks started to main deck this card, and actually use it in meta decks. You see, most, if not all meta decks, run a bunch of hand traps, and the most commonly used hand traps all have 0 attack. So Aqua Dolphin can easily get rid of one of them from your opponent's hand with its effect, as well as giving you information on your opponent's hand to play around their other hand traps. In Goki decks, the meta deck that makes use of it, Aqua Dolphin also has the perfect level and type to go into place outside of its effect, as it can be used to make Invoker or Isolde, and its burn damage can be made useful for the new time rules, to get in a little bit of burn damage to win right away. Aqua Dolphin was a useless card for years that only recently started seeing meta level play, because of a bunch of stars aligning to allow it to all of a sudden be useful in a format over 10 years later after its release. Alright, and that's it for some of the best bad cards. Seeing as there were very few good bad cards, the list is a little imbalanced with gimmick deck cards first, and then ending off with more meta decks. So if you know of any other good bad cards I missed, I'd love to hear about them. It was kind of hard putting my list together. And if you have any ideas for videos just like this one, just let me know, and I might make them.